but that's okay. So, how is everybody doing? I'm so glad to be back here. I can't even tell you, it's such a blessing to be back up here again and teaching. So this has been quite the journey. Sandy's going to be passing out the paper. If you guys have been through my classes before, you know that I like giving a lot of homework. I like giving things to read, things to help you to understand the information. Because here's the key with the Bible. If you don't know the information, you don't know what you're reading, it kind of makes it a little difficult. And then people tend to say, well, I don't understand that stuff anyway, so we're not even going to go into it. So that's kind of the goal of this whole thing, is that the goal is try to get you to help everybody to understand what's in the Old Testament. That is a really big goal of this class, to understand. So for the last 9 months, I've been preparing. Now, granted, as you probably know, every year I go to Jeff and say, hey, can I have about 4, 5, 6, 12, 13, 14 weeks more? And the answer is always, no. Nah, I'm just kidding. He doesn't do it like that. He's just like, well, John, other people need to. So you guys get it. And I agree with him. So we have 12 weeks to do this. It's going to be a lot of information, but I promise you, if you put the work into this, my goal at the end of this whole entire 12 weeks is for you to know and understand the Old Testament in its entirety better. That's the reason why we have this. All right, so let's get going. All right, so why study the Old Testament? Well, the Old Testament is actually really an interesting thing because it is history. If you've been in my classes, I say that every time. It is history. It is really about, from what we're dealing with, 1,000 years of history. Anybody know how many years the New Testament is? That the New Testament deals with? About 30. Yeah, about 30. So, because I'm talking usually to the end of, I usually think about the end of Acts. So I'm talking the Apostle John, usually the end of Acts. It's about 30 years. So we can't really see how many people live their lives and what God did in people's lives over time and what God did in politicians' lives or anything else. We can't see that unless we go to the Old Testament. Once you go to the Old Testament, then everything is going to come alive because now we're seeing God in action. It also helps us to understand Jesus better. But let's not, now don't get me wrong, I love teaching about Jesus, but I know that Jeff really wants me to focus on the Old Testament. So although it's good to learn about Jesus, good to learn about the New Testament, God has a lot of things to tell you about in the Old Testament too. So that's what we're going to do. Now, Romans 15:4, for everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in Scriptures and the encouragement they provide we might have hope. At the end of this class, my goal is to increase your hope, because we're going to go over some stuff, and hopefully at the end of it, you're going to have a light bulb turn on and say, ooh, that's actually pretty cool. All right. So not reading the Old Testament is like going through life without knowing how to read or do math. I mean, you can live without knowing how to read and do math. Your life's just going to be a lot more difficult. Now you say, well, why is that? Because you got to remember, God put this all these books together for a reason. And he gave it to you for a reason to help you to understand him better. And that's the whole goal of this class. So I like what the scholar David Pagenkoff says. Now, y'all know who I'm talking about. He's in our church. This is actually a joke. But the key is, I even asked him to do this. So he told me, I sat and listened to him one day, and he said, you can learn from Hebrews, but still not truly understand the information. If you want to understand the information, you got to go to the Old Testament. That's a direct quote, and I thought that was a great quote from him. Because I agree. You can go through Hebrews and understand about little bit about the law in Romans, a little bit about how the sacrifices work in Hebrews, but if we're going to really do it, we got to go back. Now, here we have is David at his study. Rembrandt painted David at his study. David Pagikoff in his study. David Pagikoff in his study. There we go. There's David. So he's a thinker. Yeah, you guys can tell him, hey, we saw you in your study when you see him again. All right, so let's talk about the books of the Old Testament. So the Old Testament is really broken down in a certain way. And let me tell you, everything in this class, not just today, but for the next 12 weeks, there is a purpose for it. There's a purpose for you to understand what the books of the Old Testament are. There's a purpose for understanding the prophets, the history, and everything. So the Old Testament is broken down first into the books of the law. It's called the Pentateuch. I taught that class last year. So if you have not seen the Pentateuch class, I highly recommend you also go back and watching that, because that will really help you to understand what the law is, Moses, when they're coming out of Egypt and into the land. Now, once they get into the land, that's the history books. Okay? So the history books literally are once they get into the land. The history books deal with 1,000 years of history. 1,000 years. Starts with Joshua and actually ends with Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah are the end of the story. They don't kind of fall in the middle. They're the end. They're the books of poetry, which we're really not going to go into this time. They're the major prophets, and then there are the minor prophets. The major prophets, just little information. The major prophets are not better than the minor prophets. They're more cooler. They're great where these guys are. It's all how much they wrote. It's all about how much. Now, I'm going to tell you something. In the Torah, which is the Jewish Old Testament, which is literally the same books as these, they do not put David in the prophets. They actually put Daniel, they don't have him in the prophets. They actually have him in the history books. When we get to Daniel in this class, you're going to understand why. But he's kind of a hybrid in a sense. All right. So what are we going to focus on in this class? Well, my wonderful friend here, she has been passing these out. This is the homework. Okay? Please. How many pleases? Anyway, please read this. Because what this is basically is going to tell you, first of all, is it's going to give you kind of what this class is going to entail. I cannot spend a lot of time today doing that. I could spend 30 minutes just talking about what we're going to be doing. That's why I wrote this. It's about 3 pages, not too long. But also, I included the homework from the last few weeks. Now, if any of you have not done the homework that I gave for the last 5 weeks, it's a good idea to do it, because we are actually going to be dealing with some stuff from the first weeks of the homework. I gave you guys that for a very specific reason, to help you to understand. Okay? So, we're going to be talking about the major prophets, minor prophets, and the history books. Now, there is no way in the world, and this paper kind of goes into that. I kind of talked about how I broke it down and kind of put it together. But the thing is, there's no way in the world we're going to go into all the information they have to say. But what we're going to be doing is putting everything together and picking certain parts of it out with the goal of bringing information together. Because the goal is with the Old Testament, if you understand specific information, you will then understand what you're reading. So why not focus solely on the prophets? Well, here's the problem. You know, when I was going to the Wednesday night classes with Glenn, and by the way, I mentioned Glenn in here. So, and I remember you and I were talking like last week about that, how wonderful the things we went through the prophets. But here was the problem that I realized even with my own self when I was teaching it. I didn't really understand that much of what they're really saying. And the reason why, the prophets without a historical background, you're going to be totally lost. Why is God saying these things? Why is this guy ranting and raving? Why is this guy talking about Assyria? And why is this guy talking about Edom? And why is this guy... Once you get the historical background, you're going to put the pieces together. Because really, if you think about it, the Old Testament is a puzzle. It's not easy to learn. But if you get the pieces just right, you'll get enough of it so that when you actually see that, there's a few pieces may be missing, but you'll know exactly what the picture is, even though a few may be missing here and there. So history, that is the question. History is the question. We have got to go through history. We've got to deal with history because you've got to remember the prophets came for a reason. Now, I hope you understand that the prophets really did not come just to talk about Jesus. Only about 10% of the prophetic stuff talks about Jesus. They had a very specific thing that they were coming to tell us. And if we understand what they were talking about, our lives are going to be much easier. And you're going to start reading the Old Testament and say, oh, no, I know exactly what they're talking about. That's the goal. So Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun, so understanding history is important. I was loving the book City of God that Augustine really went on and on and on about things in the history about how important it is. How important history is and what it shows us and what it can teach us. And biblical history is no different. Once we learn what they went through, we're going to see that they're no different than we are. And that's kind of what I tell you about in this class. The Jews were no different than we are. They went through the same stuff we went through. They dealt with the same problems we went through. Today is not the worst day of ever. Today is not even as bad as some of the things they went through. Because let me tell you, when they were under Manasseh, whew, that was bad. You know, you don't saw Isaiah in half for nothing. Seriously. So whatever we're going through now, it's not as bad as some of the things they dealt with. It got pretty bad there. So let's look actively on what we're going to be talking about for the next 12 weeks. Now, I say this is a science term. I did science work. I have laboratory medicine and everything in my background. So we look at when we do something active, it is a process that we're literally using energy and actually doing something. So we're going to work at something today that at first it's going to blow your brains. But we're going to work through it. Because the key with all of this is, once you understand how the Old Testament works, what the names of the people, the geography of the people, the history of the people, once you get that stuff down, then it's the light bulb, I guarantee, will turn on. And you'll want to go there all the time. But the key is that I want to keep it simple. Today's not going to be simple, because I've got a lot to throw at you in a small amount of time. But in the end of today, I promise you, we're going to bring it together, and you're going to see something very, very cool. You're going to learn for a very specific verse that God has a lot to say about that. So, what will we learn in this class in the Old Testament? We're going to learn history. We got to go through history. So we're going to take a few days and learn history. It's not going to be tons, but we're going to kind of go through everything that you have a background so that when we get to those places in the prophets, we can say, oh yeah, this is what we're talking about at this time in history. Because The key with the prophets are they came at a very, very specific time. We're also going to go through prophets that there's no books written from them. Like Elijah and Elisha. I wish they had books, man. Those guys did a lot of stuff. I'll tell you, Elijah and Elisha probably did more in the Old Testament than almost anybody else other than Moses did. It's that much. So we're going to go through guys like that and talk about it. But you've got to know the history, because the history was, for instance, when Elisha was dealing with the kings and he was dealing with Syria, if you don't know what he's talking about, and when he deals with Syria and the commander in Syria and stuff like that, you're going to be lost. So that's where we're going to have to go there. Background information. I'm going to give you some books that you guys could also read to give you background information. Because the key is we're learning not only about Israel. The Bible doesn't just talk about Israel. The Bible talks about Israel. It talks about Egypt. It talks about Assyria. It talks about Babylon, Elam, Persia. So we're going to have to go through that, which then brings us to geography. We kind of need to know where all of that stuff is. Okay? So let's take this verse. Jeremiah 31:15. A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. That verse also comes in Matthew 2:18. Most of you most likely know that verse from Matthew 2:18. Does everybody know what that verse was about in Matthew? Why was Rachel weeping for her children? What happened to her children in Matthew 2:18?
Children were slaughtered in the area.
Yes, children that were slaughtered by Herod. Slaughtered by Herod. Okay, because of Jesus. But the interesting thing is, and this is the first point I want to make when we're learning the Old Testament, is that although that's true, there actually was an original meaning that wasn't about that at all. Now, if you remember when Jeff did his class on Revelations, he talked about when there is a prophecy, there's usually a couple meanings, a meaning for right now and sometimes a meaning for the future. Almost everything about Jesus in the Old Testament has a two-part purpose. One thing for right that minute, and then one thing for down the road. So that's how we're going to deal with that. So when you read this, Jeremiah actually had something else to say about this. So just a little context, this whole entire chapter is a prophecy about the kingdom of Israel. We're going to talk a little bit here in a few minutes about the kingdom of Israel versus the kingdom of Judah. This is a kingdom of Israel. However, let me just give you a little context. The whole chapter is about Israel. But at this particular time, around 600 BC, under Jeremiah, Israel's been gone for 140 years. They're gone. They're out of here. They are now scattered all over Kingdom Come from the Assyrians. Now, they deserve it, and we're going to get into that here in a minute, but I wanted to give you the thing. So what's interesting about this is you're reading something that he was preaching to the people of Judah, the only people left. But he was actually talking about Israel that got taken away 140 years earlier. Now, if that doesn't make you scratch your head going, what the heck is he talking about? So, let me explain. So first, where is Ramah? Ramah, if you look at it, you'll see that the Salt Sea, the very top of the Salt Sea, and I know it's kind of hard to see this. If you just go directly from the Salt Sea straight across that way, it's going to run into Jerusalem. Ramah is about 2 to 3 miles north of that. But what's the significance? Good point. One thing you've got to know, there is significance to everything. God does not just say something just for the sake of saying it. So part of understanding the Old Testament is understanding what specifically God is going to be saying or what he's saying at that point. So when you study it, you're going to have to look up what is Ramah. It's going to be a little work, but it'll be well taken care of. So Ramah is right up there. Now, the thing is, what is Ramah talking about? Well, Ramah is specifically talking about Rachel, Jacob's wife. Wait a minute, Rachel's wife? This is Genesis. We're sitting around 600 BC. Rachel's wife was 2100 BC. How are we going from this point to this point to this point? Again, this is the problem with the Old Testament. However, the key here is that when you look at a name in the Old Testament, a name means everything. Rachel is very specific. Jacob, Ephraim, Manasseh, Judah, Joseph. Okay? Whenever a name is mentioned, the Israelites knew exactly what they're talking about. Now, again, it's going to take a little bit of work on our part to kind of look at it. And again, that's what this class is going to do. We're going to basically look at things and kind of pick them apart, go through the history, go through a little polytheism, go through some things so that you can put the puzzle together. So within that verse, it says, surely I've heard Ephraim's moaning. Anybody know who Ephraim is? Joseph's son. Yeah, Joseph's son. One of his two sons. Now, remember, part of the things now, I know you guys probably thought I was crazy by giving homework, but that was the first day's homework was that stuff. And the reason why I gave that is because if you know the who of the Genesis account, you're going to know what you need to know about the prophets. Genesis? Yes. The key is found in Genesis with all of this stuff. The key with the prophets, the key with the history, the key with names, it's all in Genesis. Because what they do is if you know the tribes of Israel from Genesis 48 and 49, you know who they're talking about, you're about 40% into the New Old Testament right there. You're going to understand a lot. Okay? So, guys, that's a big thing to remember. Make sure you go through Genesis 48 and 49. Because everything they're talked about, the rest of the Old Testament is going to be about. When they mention a person's name, it has very big significance. So let's talk about that. So, first when you ask is, well, who are Rachel's children? Because it had nothing to do with Rachel per se. It's really her children. Because that's what it says. You're going to find that his children were Joseph and Benjamin, the young guys. But what's interesting is Joseph is almost never talked about in the afterwards. Genesis 48 and 49 tells you this. Joseph is not talked about because Joseph was so popular and was such a great guy that God said, all right, we're going to give everything to your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So whenever you hear Ephraim and Manasseh, that's Joseph. Ephraim and Manasseh, that's Rachel. Now again, you're going to yourself, I'll never remember all this. No, you probably won't. But the key is, you won't remember, but the key is now you at least know where to begin. Welcome everybody, come on in. You'll know where to begin to look for it. And the key here is Genesis 48 and 49. Please, please, please make sure you do that. Now, what I also did is all the homework I gave out there, I put it in here. So by next week, you can actually go through all of this. I did put the first week's homework, which is this stuff, and I told you about it. So it's a great thing to do. So Joseph is not really spoken of. Now, we're really going to focus in this class on the time after Solomon. Solomon is the king. Solomon is the king. Solomon was actually, in my opinion, one of the worst kings of all time. I know it probably shocks you, but he was terrible. Boy, did he do some bad things. And he set the country up for major, major failure. After Solomon, his son came up, but see, because Solomon was so evil, God said, I'm going to take away your tribes, all but one. But the key is, Solomon also made all the Israelites really, really mad. We'll go into that in a few weeks. Solomon made them very mad. He did forced labor. And they actually stoned the guy to death. But anyway, we'll get into that. So the thing is, after Solomon, the country split in two. That's where we're going to start this whole entire class, because most of the prophets really came from that point. Country's been split in two, Israel and Judah. But once the split occurs, Ephraim is usually referred to as Israel. Now I know you're going, what are they doing here? This is nuts. The reason is Ephraim was the most popular people. Now, you ever remember I remember there was the jocks and the cheerleaders, in high school, the most popular, everybody loved them. Yeah, whatever. I never liked them, but hey, because I was always a nerd. So the thing is, Ephraim was the big guy. But do you guys know who God chose instead? Which of the 12 tribes did God choose? Judah. Ephraim was not happy. The whole country was not, whole Ephraim people was not happy. They wanted to be on top. Ephraim, basically from the judge's account on, the ark was stationed in Ephraim for 400 years. That's a big thing. They thought, we're just the best. And they really, you can see it through Judges and all that. They thought they were the best. So from now on, whenever you hear the name Ephraim, you have to think the 10 tribes of Israel. Because quite often God will say Ephraim, just like he did here. Because remember, Jeremiah is speaking about Israel 140 years ago. And he's saying Ephraim. That means the 10 tribes. There's another couple pieces coming together here. So you go through the Genesis account, you go through that to learn these guys and learn the tribes, but when they speak of this, that's what they're talking about. Okay, they began a new country, put golden calves up top and bottom, okay, at Dan and Bethel, and basically they walked away from God. And this is literally about 940 BC. And we're sitting at 600 BC right now. So 340 years earlier, they did this. They were so bad. Do you know that not one, zero, zilch, zero, nothing, not one king served God after this. Not one. Israel was really, really bad. And God said, finally, after a couple hundred years, saying, we're done. You're going away. The Assyrians came in, took Israel away. That's where we're at right now with Jeremiah saying, he's talking about them. So when you hear Ephraim, you always think Israel. So when Jeremiah spoke this prophecy, those guys were still in exile. So Rachel was crying for her children, Ephraim and Manasseh, because they're gone. They're gone. The lost 10 tribes, you've probably heard of it. They're gone. But there is hope. God, although God did judge them, and he said, this is it, and they went away, there's going to be hope. Israel is taken to a faraway place due to their sins, and he was an unruly calf. Remember we talked about? Oops. Ephraim, I hear Ephraim's moaning. You discipline me like an unruly calf. Israel's saying, you did this to me, God. But they deserved it. They deserved it. You're going to find that if you think it's bad in America today, how would you like only 3% of the people to be Christian in this country? 3%. It's a lot more than that now, because that's where it was in Israel. 3% of the people actually followed God. We know this because God tells that to to Elijah, and says, 7,000 people have not bowed their knee. And that was out of the couple 100,000 people that were in the tribes, that's 3%. That's pretty sad. But again, I want you to understand, that's why God was pretty upset with these guys. But what happened is, this was spoken in a time when Judah, who now is doing the exact same thing Israel did, because you got to understand, Judah really only had about I would say 4 decent kings and 2 really good kings. Now again, we're after Solomon, we're not talking David. So 4 decent kings and 2 really good kings out of 20. Not good. And at this time, things were going way downhill. So it was bad. But the thing is, what God was saying in this is that even though Ephraim sinned greatly and deserved what they got, which they did, just like us, we deserve what we get, God was going to bring Judah's brothers and sisters home. So guys, here's the point. When he was talking in this, a voice cried, Rachel weeping and moaning for her children, what he's saying is, God was telling the people of Judah, you're about to go with Nebuchadnezzar. Now, some of you have probably heard about this, how Nebuchadnezzar, over 3 different times, they took Daniel, they took Ezekiel, he took all the people, he destroyed Jerusalem, leveled it. They were going to go. But in the midst of that, God was saying to them, just like I'm going to bring Rachel's kids back, I'm going to bring you back. He gave them hope prior to things happening. So when he speaks of Israel, however, he's talking to Judah, like we've been saying. But I want you to read Isaiah. This is interesting. Isaiah was written about 150 years earlier. And the interesting thing is, remember what I told you right now, that God was talking to Judah saying, don't worry, I'm going to bring you back. You're about to die, you're about to go on, you're up to this, but I'm going to bring you back afterwards. Okay, in Judah. Well, look what Isaiah said to Israel 150 years earlier. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time and reclaim the surviving remnant of his people. He gave them hope before they left too. From Assyria, Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt, Cush, Elam, Babylonia, Hamath, the islands. God didn't just say it to them. He said to Israel before they left, don't worry, guys, I'm going to bring you back. They didn't deserve it. 0 good kings, 0. 3% of the population. They were killing prophets. They were hunting them down. So it's interesting. That's why Jeremiah, 150 years later, says this. Even though Ephraim greatly sinned and they deserved what they got, God was going to bring them back. Oops, sorry, that's my wrong slide. Jeremiah says, sing with joy, Jacob. So think about it. Jacob, all 12 tribes came from Jacob. Who was he talking to? Everybody. So when you hear the word Jacob, it's everybody. If you hear Joseph, you hear Ephraim, Manasseh, it's just those guys, or sometimes Israel. Again, I know this is overwhelming and this class is not going to be like that all the time. My goal is to show you how we're going to put the pieces together in this class. And it says, I will gather them and bring them from the ends of the earth. So what does the ends of the earth mean? This is where we need to know a little bit about geography. And we're going to go through geography, and a good idea is have Google ready. Map of ancient Israel, of the land of Mesopotamia, whatever. I always go to Google. I have a book of maps, and what it does is going to show us. So if you see Egypt, Upper Egypt is the bottom. I know it's weird, but that's what it is. Upper Egypt is the bottom. Lower Egypt is the top. Haran, that's where Abraham comes from, where Abraham came from. Okay? And so Hamath is over up there. That's going to be in Syria. Syria and Assyria. They're two different places. Babylonia, Sumer, Elam. If you're getting hopefully you're getting this, that means the whole world. Because that's all the people knew. They didn't know anything else. God wasn't going to talk about America to someone who didn't even know what America was. When it talks about this, guys, when Isaiah says named all these people, literally it means the whole earth. Everything that you know of. God's going to bring you back. So the key is that God knew exactly what he's doing. So when he names these places, it's a good idea for you to have a map in front of you to kind of say, oh, now guys, here's the point. You're thinking, why should I do all that work? It's worth it. All you have to do is do it a couple times and you'll start getting it and you'll start remembering it. So next time when you jump in and want to read this, or this, it's like, oh, I understand it now. So having an understanding of the Genesis account of the names, having a little bit of understanding of the history and knowing when everybody was set up in there, having a little bit of understanding of geography, of knowing who he's talking about, because it's all going to be the same people over and over and over and over and over again. So, although the exile of Judah had not yet occurred, which it hadn't, we know it began about 20 years later. Think about it. Judah and Israel were entirely unfaithful to God. They did not deserve anything, just like us. We don't deserve anything. However, God was encouraging those who would be taken into exile. He did not want to forget Israel, or he did not want them to forget Israel. He wanted them to know that he didn't forget their brothers and sisters. I mean, wasn't that the coolest thing God just did for them? You're about to go. Oh, yeah, but don't worry. Not only am I going to bring you back, but, oh, by the way, I'm going to bring your brothers and sisters back too. You're about ready to go in chains, which they went in chains, to Babylon. But God said, don't worry, guys. We're good. I got you. We're going to bring you back. Oh, yeah, and by the way, all your brothers and sisters are going to come with you down the road. Now, that's going to be down the road. But still, after what these guys did to God, that's pretty nice. So God has often been perceived as angry and vengeful deity. However, this shows he's nothing like that. He's not angry and vengeful. God doesn't hate us. He's not mad at us. God cares about us. I'll never forget. I got out of the Navy and I disobeyed God years and years and years ago. I got out of the Navy and I said, forget it, I want to go home, I don't want to do it. God said, no, you need to stay and all this. I didn't do it. But I'll never forget this. I went to the airport when I picked my stuff up after I got back from Okinawa. And even though I was in complete rebellion of God, I remember that they lost my luggage, everybody's luggage, but I was going to start filling the paperwork out. But he spoke to my spirit and said, your luggage is here. I'm like, yeah, right, whatever. And I felt, no, your luggage is here. Oh, okay. And guess what? It was right around the corner. People went all the way. No one knew. But I walked right to it. I didn't deserve it. God did it because he cared. I was in complete disobedience, but he still cared. And that's what he's doing here. This prophecy would help the exiles in Babylonia to encourage them during their difficult time. So now can you see that when we're looking at this thing that looks like that, in the end we're looking at something that's going to be about Jesus, but yet what God was saying is, hey guys, you're about to go and it's going to be very, very hard, but I got you back. Even though you deserve it. So God is kind and compassionate. So this is what Jeremiah says, and actually this is Jeremiah saying just a few chapters before this. This is what the Lord says, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you from this place. For I know the plans I have for you. Ooh, everybody's heard that verse before. But that verse specifically is talking about God encouraging those who are extremely disobedient. Plans to prosper and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call on me and you'll pray to me and listen to me when the time comes. God's saying, you guys have done some really bad things, but I am going to take care of you still. Now this is what we say God in action. God's not mean. The Old Testament, the prophets are not vengeful. There is a purpose for it. God, what's interesting about the prophets, you're going to see some kind of harsh words to people. Now, they deserve all those harsh words we're going to see in this class. But the key is God continued in the end saying he always softened it. So what this helps us to see is that even though our loved ones may be walking away, God can still bring them back. He still cares for them. He still cares for us. Again, this is the Old Testament in action. This is a huge thing. So it's history. It's recording God in action. Many people like Marcion and Sinope, and I always like to mention Marcion. I'll show you here in a second. Marcion and Sinope, he used to say, well, the God of the Old Testament's not the same God as the New Testament. We always think he's vengeful and evil. We don't need the Old Testament. But what we just saw is that couldn't be farther from the truth. God wasn't mean. God was kind. By the way, it's not this Martian, but that Martian. So, stop, Earthling, or I will shoot you with my P-38 space modulator. Anyway, so the thing is, it didn't matter. And tell you what, the reason why I always say this guy, because for 300 years afterwards, and I think even there, he's even some that still follow Marcion. He was considered the arch heretic, they call him. But yeah, it's pretty bad. But he was wrong. And so are we when we look at this. The prophet Malachi says, for I, the Lord, do not change. God of the New Testament is the God of the Old Testament. He's the same God. The kindness from the New Testament is seen in the Old Testament. The mercy in the New Testament is seen in the Old Testament. We just witnessed it. That God was saying, you guys are terrible, but you know what? I love you, and I'm still going to make, my promise is going to stay the same because I don't change. Everything we see Jesus doing in the New Testament, we see God do in the Old Testament. So what are we going to learn the next 11 weeks? We're going to learn about the prophets, Jewish history, historical information, and next week we're going to start polytheism. Now, guys, polytheism, you're kind of thinking to yourself, why do we need to know about all these other gods? Trust me, if you want to understand the Old Testament, you have got to know what they were thinking, okay? If you want to understand, if 300 years from now people understand us, they're going to want to understand about what we were thinking. Because they're going, well, why are you guys doing all these really dumb things back then? Well, there was a reason. And if you understand us, what we're thinking, one of the things that are pushing today even, you're going to find that once you get that understanding, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Almost every book in the Old Testament has something to do with polytheism, multiple gods. That's why the first 3 commandments are specifically about polytheism. 3 out of 10 commandments are specifically about that. So we're going to spend 2 weeks on it, but I promise you, you're going to love it because we have a lot of cool stuff. You're going to learn about sheep's livers and entrails and wizardry and witchcraft. We're going to learn all kinds of stuff. It's actually kind of, trust me, you'll like it. Anyway, 2 weeks of polytheism, 2 weeks of history, and 7 weeks of historical view of the prophets. Now, one thing I did mention to Jeff, I asked him, well, what if after all this stuff's done, that some people want me to continue to give a little bit pieces of this? I can do that in the end. Just so keep that in mind, that if you really like all of this and you want me to teach more of just some small things, I won't be up here, but I can do some specific teaching and stuff, because I want to make sure I continue to help people as long as they want it. All right, like classes from high school and college, this builds on itself. Everything we're going to do is going to be built. We have to build the foundation. We got to go through polytheism. We got to go through history. Then we have to learn a little geography. We learn all this stuff. But the key is, guys, what you're going to find is that once we're done, because now, anybody in here realize that one verse that you always thought was about Jesus, now you kind of know, that was kind of cool what God did. You didn't know. But that's what we're going to be learning. Oh, and if you miss a class, thank you, Robbie. We will record it and save it for later viewing at your convenience. Please take all this information seriously, though. Please read the homework. I'm almost finished. Please read the homework. Please do this, because if you put the effort, you will be much more farther along in your understanding of the Old Testament. I promise. Now, here are some books that I highly recommend. The first book there, Ancient Near East, that's where we're going to be going through a lot of that next week. IVP Background Commentary, the most useful book in the world. Anyway, so also what I want, but please make sure you do this. If you want me to give you this stuff personally, text me. I'm in Simple Church. Just text me, and I'll get this stuff out to you. And I'd be more than happy to send anything you want, because my goal is I want you guys to learn it. So if you need more information or whatever, please let me know. All right, now, sorry about this. I know I've been droning on. Is there any questions? Everybody a little blown away by all this? It's a lot. Just remember, guys, we're not going to do this again. The goal is to show you how it's going to work. When we put the pieces together, it works. So please make sure you do this. Also, please do the homework, because every one of these pieces of homework that I put in here for the weeks was a specific thing we're going to be talking about in the Bible and what we're going to be talking about when learning. So the more you do now, the easier this class will become. Okay? Thanks, guys. Have a great day. You definitely want to make sure you watch those, because polytheism, if you don't understand polytheism, absolutely.
So I said I was able to see those.
That's okay. That's why we're doing this, because the problem with
preaching about the opposite. Very specific things that we're going to be doing. Right, and so when you learn about those guys, you're going to be